I hear you saying that you have to get used to these things. You have to embrace certain things to be better in high pressure for yourself and for the organization. So, what kind of mindset are you suggesting that people approach or embrace, at least, to better handle these high pressure situations?
I think flexibility is very
Mm.
key. I think a lot of people are committed to doing things in a very specific way. Like they have to get to B and I have to do one, two, three to get to B. Well, you don't though. And maybe if you did five, six, seven, things would be a little bit easier for you. And I think so flexibility is very important. I think also expectations. I think people have a lot of expectations of eradicating negative feelings, which is not the goal, nor is it possible. And so the idea is not to feel really happy all the time. Well, that you are in a tough job and you do things that are very hard and things are going to be difficult. But how do we make that more manageable for you? How do we increase your distress tolerance? How do we give you some better coping strategies? How do we make you more of a resilient person? And then figure out if this is actually the place for you. And those two things are different. So I think from a mindset perspective, I think flexibility, creativity are really important.
Do you approach it differently for, say, a leader or someone in an organization that is dealing with constant high pressure versus dips and valleys, like valleys and peaks, I guess is the better way of saying it, because it's not always like that. But other times, like an ER doctor, your adrenaline is always there. It is always at that point. Do you approach it differently that way?
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the person, because also some people do experience the ebbs and flows as constant, even though they might not actually be literally constant. It might take people a while to recover from tax season or whatever it is. And I think there's for some that constant stress is the way that they thrive best, or it's what's most familiar to them. And so in some ways they gravitate towards that, and taking that away is very difficult. And so it just really depends. So I don't think we necessarily approach it one way or another based on their self-report in that way.
Do you find that some people might not just be right for high pressure jobs, even though they went for it because it was the golden ring, brass ring, paid more money? And like it was, to your point earlier, it was the next step in the ladder. That's what they need to do. And I'm kind of curious how they handle that information, because a lot of people, that's, to your point also, it's their identity is to, I start here, I end here.
Right. I think I would describe, yes, but I would describe it differently. I would say that I think a lot of people's values are misaligned with their
Mm.
work. And so it might not be that they're not cut out for it. I think it's that what they're doing doesn't matter to them in the way that it needs to matter. And that is what makes the pressure and the constant working, that's kind of what beats them down over time. As part of it is the values piece. And so we do a ton of values work for that reason. And that also helps people start to figure out, well, actually, my identity might be something else from internally. So it's not like someone saying, well, this can't be your identity anymore. And then that's not really how it works, right? So I think that's how I would think about that question a little bit more specifically.
When people are doing that self work, I want to go back to the diversity piece we kind of kicked off with generations. Does it work for everybody? Because I mean, obviously, everybody has a different approach, definition of high pressure, expectations from home, because like you have to have the job that pays for our rent, our mortgage, our car payments. What do you mean you're going to take a different, less paying job just so you have better mental health? We have a lot of different diversity when it comes to this. Do we
Right.
have to look at things differently? I mean, as a leader, looking at ourselves and our self awareness.
Well, I think you have to think about it also as just because the information is new and different and true, maybe, doesn't mean your actions have to be drastic and right now.
Mm.
Because a lot of what we end up doing is helping people, they figure out this path is not for them. They figure out, let's say, just like classic example, I guess you have a partner at a law firm and they realize actually like community is really important to them and they're doing corporate law. And so maybe they are thinking more about like community law or being a public defender, or maybe something like that would be ideal, right? But now they have four kids, they're taking care of their elderly parents, their kids are in private school, whatever. And so they can't necessarily do that. But how do you find that community piece somewhere else? Could you maybe do, for example, over time, not necessarily tomorrow, but thinking about, okay, what's in the middle there and how would we get there slowly? Could you maybe go in-house somewhere? And then in the time that you've now found, because you're not at a big law, you can volunteer at church or something, right? Or like, where else can you find those values? Can you get a little more of it at work and then get it somewhere else if that's what you need to do financially for your situation? And if that's the case, if a shift is possible, how do you do that slowly and mindfully so that you're not just like dropping off the planet and taking a 50% pay cut or whatever it is? So there's a lot of ways. And that's why I say creativity and flexibility is important. And this, I think people are really interested in, I need the information and I need to make the change now. And it has to be right now. And it has to be all at once. And that's just not how life works. Yeah. Right. I mean, I wish it did too, right? For my own self, like that would be wonderful, but it's kind of a slog. You get the information, then you got to slowly make a plan. And then you have to figure out what the timeline of that plan is. And sometimes it is quick depending on your situation, right? But sometimes it's not. But there's always a way to improve your situation, even if you have financial constraints or location constraints, debt, whatever it is. There's still lots of ways to do that.
I love that you talk about shifts, but even more so that I think there's a self-awareness piece where a lot of people will shift through their careers and don't want to admit it. Like, for instance, they'll do a values exercise in their early 20s and they're 45 and going, those are my values. I'm like, you have not reassessed. Mm-hmm. You have 4 kids now. You live in a different city or a small town now, but they don't take the time to reassess who they are as people and their responsibilities. And because they're so, this is what I want to be when I grow up. This is my identity. They don't look at the ecosystem around them and how it's changed who they are. So their priorities might be different, but they're still focused on the brass ring.
All the time. And I think because we don't live in a culture where people are expected, told, given permission to think about their values at all, right? People just assume the values of those around them. They assume the values of their workplace. They just, this is what I'm doing. And to your point, over time, right? People change, like life happens to them. They gain perspective. That's what like age and wisdom is, right? You gain this perspective, you gain information. Like a lot of people will talk about like these traumatic events that happen to them over time and how that changes their perspective of what's important, right? So when you're 20, you can't possibly have all of the same values that you have when you're 45. It just is almost impossible. Some of the core stuff will still be the same, right? Because it is who you are as a person, but a lot of it is different or can manifest differently because there are a lot of things that happen in life that really change people forever. So I think that's a really great point. And I wish that people had more permission or even knew to do that at all.
And not think lesser of themselves because of it. Like having that idealistic approach to the person they want to be, not realizing that foundationally it can change to the person they want to be could be different as well. But yeah, we feel like we're failures if we make those shifts because we didn't get that thing we wanted. We didn't get to be the cowboy or the astronaut. We wanted to be, we were 11.
Yeah. Or even on a smaller scale, I can speak to this personally too. Like I lived in a pretty homogeneous place growing up and everyone sort of was a certain way. And it wasn't until I went to college and I met people who were really different than I was. Mm-hmm. Oh, I might actually believe that instead. And like sort of reconciling that and realizing you can still be a good person and have different beliefs than your family of origin. And lots of good people exist who believe all kinds of things and like discourse is important and all of that stuff, right? But so even on a smaller scale, it has nothing to do with work. That is a transition that a lot of people go through anyway. And then if you add like the layer of and complexity of like achievement and work and all of that, it gets very complicated.
And it's much better to do the work progressively, as you mentioned earlier, than it is as a shocking, you burnt out, you got fired, your identity's so wrapped up, and you have an existential crisis of who you want to be now that you're allowed to be that person you thought was that high pressure person, successful person. You're working with people through their journey. So not like as you mentioned, this is not a checkbox exercise. This is a journey that they are having to deal with high pressure situations, high pressure work. So how are you working with your clients and those in high pressure jobs when they go back to the workplace? Because they have to interact in the same high pressure environment that is not changing, even though they are. So what do you recommend when they go back day to day, week to week, month to month, that they approach their environment now as they're going through the journey?
Well, I think it happens kind of organically because as people gain insight and as they realize they have options and as they get excited about what those options could be because they realize they're important to them, the stress at work is different to them. It feels different. And so, yeah, we talk a lot about how to just cope with difficult coworkers and communication and missing promotions and the logistics of being in a place like that. But it tends to naturally start to be more manageable because it becomes a little further away from them.